Oh, guys, I just sat down and I was pushing the pillow I have back here likes to like wedge its way into the chair and it shoves the seat cushion forward. And so I pulled it out to push it in and I found two more pieces of glass that apparently I didn't pull that out to check. So, okay, welcome to Pollifax 101. Oh boy, guys. So just finishing up, I'm down to my last couple of chapters and I thought I could wait. I could just talk about it. We're talking because I want to talk Pollifax. I love Pollifax because Pollifax, I'm going to try to rank them. I do not know how well I'm going to do with this because there are a few that stand out and the rest are just below it. I don't have any that I dislike. I have some that I don't. I have a couple that are definitely my least favorites. But it's even then, it's kind of a barely, but they're clearly. So, you know, but then there's that whole nebulous middle, you know, that most of them fit in and I love. So we're just going to do this. Get my laptop open. We're going to do this. We're going to talk Pollifax. So while I find my Pollifax stuff, let's talk about the gist. Okay, because I mean, most people know, but on the off chance that someone doesn't, somehow, some way they've missed all the fun that is the Pollifax books. The Mrs. Pollifax series is a kind of a cozy espionage. They all pretty much do have a mystery, but they are not mysteries. Most of the time you are solving something, but not always. And the point isn't, you know, to solve a mystery. The point is, you know, she is there to do a job. So Mrs. Pollifax, when she was, you know, late 50s, early 60s, and she pretty much doesn't age in this series, not really. When, you know, there was one morning she was literally ready to walk off her roofs and call it good. She just didn't have anything to live for. She goes to the doctor. He asks if she's ever, you know, had anything she's ever wanted to do that she hasn't done. And her solution is, well, yeah, I always wanted to be a spy. So she gets her letter from her congressman and she goes to Langley and volunteers to be a spy. And oh, by the way, just happens to be in the room where someone is expecting someone else to be, and she's exactly what he wants. And it kicks off her, you know, little jobs for the CIA, right? Well, those air quotes are the size of the Empire State Building because she does get sent on very innocuous, simple little courier jobs or whatever, and then they end up not being what they were supposed to be. And I don't know how Carstairs doesn't have an ulcer or something. So let's talk characters first before we talk individual books, because I can start doing some more searching that way. First off is obviously Emily Pollifax. She's an older woman, not old, but she's older. She has grown children and grandchildren. She lives in New Jersey. She's a very respectable woman. So she's got an apartment. She has a neighbor that we meet a couple of times. And she is a volunteer queen. She's got her garden club and she volunteers at the hospital. And she does a lot of things. And as the series progresses, some of those things get added in. One, she starts learning karate from an ex-police officer. And she takes up yoga. So if the fact that someone does yoga at all is a problem for you, then you don't want them. She tends to be really interested in lots of things. She becomes part of the environmental movement. She has a club that she's a part of. You know, she's really into clubs and committees, right? And she also tends to study just lots of things. She's a very curious, interested person. And because of that, she tends to know a lot about things that I wouldn't even be interested in. You know, she knows the gist of this Buddhist thing or that country somewhere that she read about once, or, you know, just lots of different things. So it's kind of weird because I think we're supposed to believe that she is at least a cultural Christian. This is not Christian fiction, but I think we're supposed to think, they mentioned in the first few books her pastor and her church. And so you get the feel that this is part of her life, but she is interested in pretty much anything. And so if that bothers you in mainstream fiction, again, you're not going to like it. But it's one of those interesting things where she's curious about people and the people and why people believe and take part and how they set things seems to be the impetus for her interest more than anything, in my opinion. So there's that. Now, she wears hats. Elaborate, ridiculous hats. There's one in one of my favorite books. At some point, her hat gets all askew, and this, really elaborate feather that had wound around it ends up getting ripped off, and it's standing straight up in the air, because there's these enormous roses. But the hats come into play in some of the books. And so there's a point to them on top of it, just it being kind of a point to her quirkiness. She just is a quirky person. Now, there are 3 people that are in all the books. Obviously, Pollifax. Then there is Carstairs, also known as Blackjack, in some later books when you find out about his pre-CIA days. But Carstairs is the man who found her, discovered her, decided she was the perfect innocent tourist. And Carstairs, he's like in charge of this particular branch or section of the CIA. And so he sends her out on these things, just convinced that she's perfect and nobody is going to suspect her. And it's an easy job. There's no reason for anything to go wrong in it all. Well, of course, it always goes wrong. And then there's Bishop, who is his assistant. And Bishop is a young guy who also never seems to age. Nobody really ages in these, even though they started getting written in the mid 60s, I think, or mid to late 60s, and continued all the way through the late 90s, maybe early 2000. Let me double check that. Okay, so it's 2000. The last one was published in 2000. And yes, you can tell time has passed. They occasionally do something to show Bishop as older. They don't really try to with Carstairs too much. There's a hint somewhere, if I recall correctly, but not so much. Bishop is young, he's exciting, he's just a darling. She kind of adopts him like a second son. And he's like the one who usually notifies her that something's coming up. He's the one that gets really mad at Carstairs when she gets in trouble. And, just Bishop is a lot of fun. I love Bishop. He's kind of like the ever boy. It's one of those things where usually, especially men who don't grow up, really annoy me. But it works for him. Because he's mature, but he's boyish in his fun and his outlook, and he really loves eclairs. Okay, you need to know that. That's important. And muffins. He likes muffins too. But so those are the 3 primary characters. Then you have other characters that come in afterwards. First, there is John Sebastian Farrell. He's in, he's in the first one. He's in the 5th one. And maybe number 9. And then definitely the last 2. He's in quite a few. And John Sebastian Farrell, when he steps in, things change. Johnson, he's got a mouth on him. I don't want to make it sound like he's constantly swearing, because he's not. But there is more language in books that he is in. There just is. And it's kind of a word study on how good, bad company corrupts good morals, because she will use words occasionally, very rarely throughout the series, but when she's in the same book with him, she's more likely to. It does happen more, and you can see it. And I wonder if Gilman did that deliberately, because it's there more whenever he's there. It's really weird. And it's kind of cool. The language is not atrocious. In the sense that some people don't even consider them foul words. I do. You will find, oh, this is so hard for me to even say these. Can I just say it's really hard? But you will find the occasional damn, the occasional hell, and a couple of different types of flippant uses of God's name. One that doesn't offend me, and the other one does. So you will occasionally hear an "oh God," and usually, or read, and usually in those instances, to me, it's prayerful. And it may not be intended to be by the character or the author, but it reminds me of how all nature, cries out in praise for God. Well, people do this when they're really upset. They will pray even though they don't realize they're doing it. And it reminds me a little bit, if you've seen While You Were Sleeping, when Sandra Bullock jumps onto the track after Peter Callahan is pushed off. When she jumps on and is trying to get him, at some point she says, "Oh God." And it sounds prayerful because of the situation. She's afraid she's going to die, and she's trying to keep her focus off of that, and she's trying to do that. And do I like it that way? No, but it still feels prayerful to me. You're going to find a few of those in there, and those are the ones that don't actually bother me much, because whether she means it to be or not, I see it as prayerful. I'm just saying. But then there are the occasional, Farrell will say "good God" occasionally, and I'm just like, "Ugh." But on the other hand, I really love the fact that he's being flippant and yet announcing God's goodness. And I know it's not deliberate, but it kind of cracks me up, even though it annoys me at the same time. It's kind of weird. But they're in there. They're not on every page. They're not in every chapter. They're not in every few chapters usually. But you will find them in the books, and you will find them more often when John Sebastian Farrell is in there, which is why I reserved it for him. There's one other character we will get to in a minute, and he also... If I never hear the word hell again, I won't be sorry because of him. Because compared to the rest of the books, which are pretty much clean, aside from these random things, you don't hear it. But then out of the blue, and you're just like, ugh. So anyway, so you have John Sebastian Farrell. He shows up several times. You have Robin Burke Jones, who I can't tell you anything about him because it's a spoiler for book 4. But Robin Burke Jones shows up in that one first, and he's in at least 2 more after that. And it's a lot of fun. I can't tell you anything. John Sebastian Farrell he's an artist. He runs an art gallery in Mexico City. And at one point, he does a few other things. He used to be part of the CIA, and he is no longer. Okay, there's that. Then Cyrus Reed, you meet in book 5. And from then on, he's in almost every book. He is a judge, a circuit court judge, I think, or an ex-circuit court judge. He was a lawyer. He's just a fun character. He's unique. He's really weird. At one point in one book, I'll just say he gets kidnapped. Just throwing that out there. And Emily Pollifax has to go find him, and that one's a hoot. So there's a lot of characters that reappear. Also, Katie Hopkirk, she reappears in 2 or 3. I think it's two that she reappears in. And then there are a couple of minor characters that occasionally, come back in. But these are ones that have significant roles in the books that they're in that I'm mentioning. So, you have a cast of characters that you kind of get to know, and you get to remember them throughout the books. And that's kind of neat, because it becomes, I don't know. I like the fact that you every once in a while, it's like all of a sudden here's this person that you knew, and you're like, oh, they're back. And it just makes me really happy. One of the things you have to remember about these is that I have a hair on my face. It's driving me insane. They make you have to suspend belief, but not as much as you'd think. I mean, on the one hand, this little old lady learning karate what? But on the other hand, I could some of this stuff I could totally see my grandma doing. My grandma was an amazing woman, and if she had run into Carstairs and he had sent her on these things and they had gotten into these kinds of situations, she'd have done her best to do pretty much the same kind of stuff that Emily Pollifax does. And it's kind of weird because not all women would. Okay, I get that. But in the sense that Mrs. Pollifax comes off as a bit of a Miss Marple kind of ditzy, you know, just kind of whatever, people would have known that Grandma was shrewd. She wouldn't have come off as an airhead, or and I don't want to say that Emily Pollifax always does, but she does when she needs to. My grandma didn't have that side, but Emily Pollifax definitely does. So, first book is The Unexpected Mrs. Pollifax. And in that one, that's the one where she goes to the CIA, where she meets Carstairs, and he needs a courier. Basically, she just has to do something simple in Mexico City after being there on vacation for a couple of weeks. She just goes into the store. She asks about a book in the window, and then she goes home. That's the plan. And it goes all wrong. Most of the book does not take place in Mexico. I'm just going to say. Most of it takes place in Albania, of all places, and they don't know what's going on, and they've got to escape, and they've got to, you know, get away from these people and the way that it happens. And in these books, I'm just going to say, they can get brutal in what happens. And I don't want to say it all happens off page, because it doesn't really happen off page per se. Some of it does. Like at one point, Emily Pollifax is tortured. We don't actually see the torture, but we see the effects on her immediately. And the long-term effects as well. And so sometimes, though, you know, someone is killed right in front of them, or she has to hurt someone herself or whatever, and it's there. It's just never gruesome. So in The Unexpected Mrs. Pollifax, she goes on this vacation and you know, comes home. I'm gonna give a tiny little spoiler, but it won't mean anything until you've read it, so it's not at the same time. She goes, you know, as sweet and fresh as a daisy with flowers on her hat, and she comes home smelling like a goat. And that's all you're getting from me. It is such a fun book. And then the second one is The Amazing Mrs. Pollifax. So in The Amazing Mrs. Pollifax, there is an event that happens over, is it in Turkey? I think it's Turkey, where an agent is trying to defect from one country, and the whole world wants this agent, and they've gotten word that she will be at one place at one time, and so Carstairs sends Mrs. Pollifax to be there to help get her out. This is her job. It's a little more responsibility, obviously, but it's supposed to be pretty simple. And of course, again, nothing is simple. The first thing that happens is that people end up dead, and they've got to hide bodies, and I mean, like the whole 9 yards. And so when they're hiding a body, at one point, they run into this man who is clearly disreputable. His name is Sandor, and I have to say, there's probably more language in the second book than there is in any of the others, I think. There might be one more that has more, but not much. The second book definitely, in my opinion, has a lot more, because Sandor literally, I feel like on almost every page that he is speaking, note that part, but if he is speaking, you're going to at some point see and I'm like, why? So I don't like that about him, but Sandor is a hoot. He's a neat character. More water. And because of who he is, he can actually help them in ways that he might not otherwise be able to. And one of the things about Emily Pollifax that happens in each of these books is that she kind of collects characters along the way. She collects people. And so she gets people to help her who aren't necessarily a part of the CIA, and maybe she's not supposed to, but she needs help, so we're going to do this thing, and off she goes. And so in this one, you know, they have to get this gal, and they've got to get her out of the country, and it's not working. Everybody's looking for him. And, you know, it's a wild ride through, including gypsies. You get gypsies. You get all kinds of stuff going on in this one. And I love how Gilman did this. So she has to do something in this one that is highly improbable. And she doesn't do it well. I appreciate that. The fact that she can do it at all is kind of like, but at least she doesn't do it well, and at least it doesn't work long term. But it does help a little bit. And it also helps in the future. And you got in a few books down the road, quite a few, almost at the end, this thing comes up again, and you're like, you know what to do here. All right. You know, so it's a whole lot of fun. Love Amazing Mrs. Pollifax. And then the third one is my favorite. It is the Elusive Mrs. Pollifax. And in this one, she's given a job. They have this guy come to her house, and he's going to make her a hat. In this hat, they're going to hide, I think, is it 7 or 12? Either 7 or 12 passports. I can't remember which. And she has to get them to this one person, and that's her job. And then she's just going to go. So she goes to Bulgaria, and this is what's going to happen. She's a tourist. She's wandering around. Well, in Bulgaria at the time, remember, this is Cold War. Pretty much, if you want to visit the country, you're going to have someone holding your hand and not letting you out of their sight. And so she's got to get away from this guide, and she's got to get to where she needs to be and do the things she needs to do. And she gets in so much trouble. I mean, I really feel sorry for her, because this woman, this guide who's like responsible for her from this tourist bureau, is her name Sophia? No, it's not. Sophia's the town. I can't remember the woman's name, but she is just horrible. She scolds Mrs. Pollifax like she's some sort of errant child all the time. And Mrs. Pollifax has to play along and do the things. But the things that they did, and the way that she kind of, it's really neat. She kind of like weaves all these things that you know they have to be connected, but they don't make any sense how they're going to connect. And then you discover that they aren't, but they are, but they aren't. And she just does this really cool thing. Well, in this one, there is this guy, Sanko. And I think what I love so much about Sanko is he is Bulgarian, he is a communist, and he is proud to be a communist. You know, I grew up during the Cold War era, and communists were like the enemy. I mean, you don't... It's almost like McCarthy was still running around, you know, because communism, you know, it was a terrible thing, and we all wanted to run from communism. Well, okay, I still don't want to have anything to do with communism, okay? I'm still not impressed. It clearly failed. But what I loved is that this man was a patriot. He loved his country. He believed in this system, and he was supporting the good of it. But where it was corrupt, he was willing to fight against it. And I just loved that she showed that people could be something that we see as not a good thing, but do it honorably because it's what they know. You know, this guy had seen before communism and how it wasn't good. So, you know, he saw an improvement, but then he saw corruption of that improvement, and he wanted that corruption gone. And I like that, and I respect that. So it's my favorite. I love Sanko. I love what they have to do there. I mean, they have to do some crazy, insane things. And I just, yes, just because, yes, it was so good. So it is my favorite. I want to say it's my favorite next to the Unexpected Mrs. Pollifax, because I mean, without that one, you don't know this one. But really, if I could only listen to one of them ever again, I would probably want to listen to Unexpected. I love it. So that's the Elusive Mrs. Pollifax, the third one. And then next is a poem for Mrs. Pollifax. And in that one, she is sent as Carstairs' mother-in-law to a hospital, like it's kind of a resort hospital in this, I think it's in the Swiss Alps. It's in Switzerland. And she is looking for something for the CIA, and it's dangerous, and they got to find it. It has to be found. And then things get really sinister in this hospital, and everything goes wrong. Someone dies. You know, they're chased, and I mean, just everything that can go wrong goes wrong. It is It is really, really, really fun. And partly because of the characters in it. Robin Burke Jones is in that one. And meeting him was a whole lot of fun. So he's really laid back, and yet he can tell that something isn't quite right. And then she has to get his help. And there's this little boy, Hafiz. I think it's Hafiz. He is so much fun. He is just, he's running all over the place, doing all kinds of things, getting people to talk in his little recorder and ask questions about, where they're from, and they watch a movie and he's translating the whole movie for her, and of course it drives everybody crazy. He's just so much fun. And yet she can tell there's something really wrong there too. And so it doesn't make sense that it has anything to do with anything, but it does. And so it just, again, all these little pieces, weave in, and I just love it so much. Then comes number 5. It is Mrs. Pollifax on Safari. And can I just say that Mrs. Pollifax shopping for Safari was a hoot. Bishop saying they don't wear cork hats anymore. And her disappointment is really, I don't know why, but once you know her and you hear that, you're like, So she goes on safari, and all her job is to take pictures of everyone else on the safari. That's all she has to do. All she has to do. And then, again, everything goes wrong. Someone is clearly not happy, and she makes new friends, but are they friends? And somebody is out to get their people are kidnapped. I mean, if it can go wrong, it does go wrong. And then the story, it finally winds up in total Pollifax fashion. And up until this point, I'm trying to remember. First one, second one, third one, fourth one. If I recall correctly, up through this one, Mrs. Pollifax doesn't actually really get hurt. Minor injuries, but nothing major. Then we go to number 6. And it's Mrs. Pollifax on the China Station. And in this one, there's a man in a Chinese work camp. He's in a prison of sorts, and they need to get him out. They need him. So her job is to help the guy who's going to do that. And of course, the guy doesn't want this little old lady's help. What on earth am I stuck with this little old lady? And he's not happy. And then, he figures out that maybe she's helpful to have after all. Well, in this one, so they go to China as a tour group, and there are people, and there are all the little intrigues in the tour group as well. We get to see, this one is like, it's almost like you get to go to China through a book and see all the things. It's really funny. In this one, though, there is a guy who definitely, he kind of, I don't want to say he's supposed to be psychic. I don't think that's right, but he definitely feels things that, so it was a little wooey there, which is the part I didn't like, but I really loved the end so much. But in this one, they go through and they get to see all the places. You get to see what one of those, stores that the Chinese had were like when people are buying Mao jackets, right? And, but you also get to see the Chinese people interacting with them. They're very excited about, understanding American culture and, what life is like in America, snow. I mean, so there's all of that. And then, at some point they've got to get this guy and do this thing. And when that happens, everything goes wrong and it's bad. And at that point, this is the first one where Emily gets hurt. She gets hurt. I'm not going to say how, and so you start to get the feeling that these things, this is much more dangerous of an assignment, because you're actually trying to extricate someone in a place where you could be thrown into prison and you're doomed, right? And so there is that, but I really like this one. I really like it a lot. And then next up, number 7 is Mrs. Pollifax and the Hong Kong Buddha. And in this one, Carstairs has heard something from an agent that doesn't seem right. Stuff is coming in and it's not right, and he can't figure it out. So he sends her to just find out what's going on with this guy. She's just supposed to check him out, see if he's there, see, what's going on, and report back. And that's supposed to be it. But everything that can go wrong goes very, very, very wrong. And in the process, she meets a guy who is a psychic. Now, this is like, it's a psychic kind of thing where, people hire him to do this if they can. And so that's what he's there for. This young guy that he knows, his father has disappeared. And so he's hired this guy to come and try to find the father. And so if psychic stuff bothers you, there is that. But in this one, she goes to where this is supposed to happen, and things are clearly not right. And then everything spirals out from there. And in this one, this is where things get brutal. In this one, she is actually tortured. And it's horrible. If knowing about torture, the results, that, things are what kind of physical problems she has after it, how they tortured her, enough based upon her injuries, but we don't live it with her. So if not living it with them is okay with you, then you should be fine. But it is a really good one, but it is a rough one, especially the end. And it is tense. This one is one of the most intense ones. You keep going and you keep going. You're like, you feel like you've got to stop and remind yourself to take a breath. It was, if you like stuff that's really intense, Hong Kong Buddha is one of the most intense ones, I think. I think so. Yeah. And then next up is Mrs. Pollifax in the Golden Triangle. And this is the one in which Cyrus is kidnapped and Mrs. Pollifax is with someone who was there at the time and they were supposed to be giving something to someone, and it all got interrupted. And this one gets a little more mystical, in my opinion, because in this one you're in Thailand, so there is the whole Buddhist culture. And at some point you actually meet, Buddhist monks and whatnot. And so if the fact of it bothers you, then, this one might be one to skip. But in this one, you are literally trudging through the Thai jungle trying to find Cyrus and rescue him. And it's just kind of a, do they call them Knuckles? I think they call them Knuckles or something like that, where these thugs are after him. And it's a whole lot of fun. And again, she just collects these people who help her or who don't, depending, and all that goes with that. And this one has a very interesting tie-in with other people and the CIA and how it works. And wow, it's not my favorite. It might be one of my least favorites, but I still really like it, obviously. So, there's that. But Mrs. Pollifax in the Golden Triangle is definitely in, it takes place in Thailand, which is fun. So in Mrs. Pollifax in the Whirling Dervish, Mrs. Pollifax is sent to Morocco. There is a group of informants, and they think one of them is a mole. So one of them shouldn't match a photograph. So they have photographs of each of the people, and they have, the locations for those people and their names. Well, each person doesn't know all of them. You only know the person who gives you the information and the person you pass that information on to. You don't know the people down the line or the people up the line. And so they have to go to each one and verify that the person's name and face and everything matches. Well, the person that she's going with Carstairs doesn't trust. He thinks that he will basically make people unwilling to talk to him. And so because he is such a brusque and unpleasant person, he's sending Mrs. Pollifax as his aunt, and her job is to, smooth the way, basically. Well, this guy isn't having anything to do with it. When she gets there, he wants nothing to do with her. Give me the photographs and I'm going. I'm not taking you with me. And she won't do it. And everything ensues from there. Just a whole mess. And they've got to try to get to each of these places and verify these people. But then people start dropping like flies, and they've got to what's going on and all the things. It's really, really good. Now in this one, you have his name is Sidi Tahar. Sidi Tahar, I think it's Sidi Tahar. He is this prophet type guy for these people. So this is part of their local culture and religion, and he does the dance. So it is in the book. You get to see it, and it's really interesting because she's heard about it and she's seen it, and she wants to know more, and she wants, because Mrs. Pollifax and curiosity. And yet this guy, it's really kind of cool how he uses this part of his faith as a way to help in this. And I can't say more, but he does actually help the situation with this. And that was really cool. It's another one where it's kind of a wild ride. You're going through Morocco and at breakneck speed, and yet you can tell because this is book number 9. It's later. Let me see. It was written in 91, long past the hippie movements, and yet there's at some point in here they do a love-in, which is really funny because it's written long past the timing of that, but clearly they're kind of back. She's writing as if it was earlier, and so that was kind of fun. And then comes Mrs. Pollifax and the Second Thief. This is right up there among my very, 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 very favorites. This is just, and I think it's not most people's favorite. I think it's ranked lower for a lot of people. So in this one, we go to Italy, and we're with John Sebastian Farrell again. But in this one, he's injured and he needs help. And so she is sent to help him and to deal with, whatever he's going on. He has asked for her help. And so Carstairs sends her. And there's stuff going on, obviously. But in addition to it, they end up at this compound, and there's this whole other story going on that is super, super cool. But in the middle of it, a bad guy we saw a long time ago is back. And he's like, whoa, what's going on, right? And so there's just so much happening in this one. It's got a lot going on. The locals, the thing in this one that some people might have problems with is that the locals call this one woman in the village a witch. And it is brought up. I think even at some point it is mentioned that she's doing something to prepare for this big event, and she's supposed to be like the protection, and they're all just kind of a little like, huh? They take it as matter of fact, not necessarily supportive. But I'm trying to remember what book. I think, yes, okay, so in my induction that came out last year as part of the Summer Heat series, the Come What May, my book induction has a scene where my character remembers listening to this book on a road trip with his mom. I think it was on a road trip with his mom. Oh no, or is he sick? I don't remember which. I think it was a road trip. And there's a scene in this one where you know, they just keep having to knock these people out as they come in. And he used that in his thing, remembering her. And so it's a totally different scenario and it's done in a different way. But I like put in this allusion to this because it is one of my most favorite scenes in all of the Pollifaxes. It is so much fun. But I love this one because there's this really neat community, and there's this really neat, I can't talk about it because it'll give it away, but there's a lot going on in it and it's all really, really exciting. Okay, so Pollifax and the Second Thief, that is number 10. And then number 11 is Mrs. Pollifax Pursued. And in this one, Mrs. Pollifax realizes that food has gone missing in her house. And she doesn't get it. So she starts looking, she starts thinking about it, and she figures out that someone is in the house. And so she's done. She's like, mm-mm. And that's part of her personality. For one thing, Mrs. Pollifax likes her food, and she gets really cranky. She totally gets hangry. She's like, I want food, you know, and at some point she's like, you know, someone says something about, you know, chocolate bar or hear something. She's like, food? It's just like, yes. So I found it really funny that food is what made her click and go, huh? You know, because for her, it's all about the food. It's really funny. But so in Mrs. Pollifax Pursued, when she opens her closet door, she finds a young girl hiding in there. And she realized, you know, she talks to the gal, and they realize that someone is after this girl and they don't know why. And so she's trying to get the girl somewhere safe. Well, as soon as they get out of the house, someone is following her. So it's Mrs. Pollifax Pursued, and she has to make a call and say, hey, Bishop, I need extraction with myself and this person. So she actually, in this one, has to go to Carstairs and Bishop for help. And then they actually put her on a case at the same time. And then there's all that ensues. The fun part about that one is, does the whole thing take place in the United States? Or at the very end, do they go to Africa? They might go to Africa at the very end. I can't. But yeah. They have to. They have to. Because, okay, yeah. So at the end of that one, they do go over to Africa, but most of the book takes place in the United States and at Carnival. And it's a whole lot of fun. It's really neat. Katie is special. You know, she grew up as the daughter of a missionary doctor. And so, you know, she grew up in Africa. And so she's got skills that fit there and other skills that just like, it's like, what? You know, I don't know what to do here because I'm just, you know, total culture shock because this isn't the culture she grew up in. And just lots of fun stuff that way. But then, and it's important to read these in order at this point because after book 5, you need to read them in order. Before book 5, you technically don't need to. But after book 5, I would not read them out of order. There's too many giveaways, and then they do start to build on each other in a stronger way than the first ones. So, Mrs. Pollifax Pursued isn't my favorite. I think it's my second least favorite, I think. But it is a lot of fun. I'm just going to say. Okay, so number 12 is Mrs. Pollifax and the Lion Killer. And in this one, she goes back to that same African country with Katie, who has become kind of a second daughter to her. And when they go, they get there for a coronation thing going on, and there are these lion killings. So there are no lions in this. I think the name of the country is Ubangiba. So Ubangiba is the only fictional country that she has. The rest of the countries are, you know, real. But so she goes back, and there are no lions in this place, but people are being slashed and killed by these lion killer, and they're trying to figure out what's going on. And on top of it, it appears that Katie is now in danger because she's remembering things from her past. And, you know, they're just, I can't say much because this is one of those ones where there's a lot of, little things. Now, in this one, you have an archaeological dig that they discover. You have political intrigue. You have really cool characters that, it's like, who are you and what is going on? You've got a lot of that kind of stuff going on. Usually when you're in a Pollifax book, you feel like you're in the country. You feel like you're living in Mexico City, and you're living in Albania, and you're living in, it's like you're just existing, and you're getting to see all the local culture, and you're getting to see, historical facts and everything. But because Ubangiba doesn't exist, that isn't there, and you do notice it's not there. The thing is, I don't think you would if you hadn't read the other books, because you would know that this is always a part of her, writing style, if you will. So you do miss it, but only because you're used to having it the other way. She does description in a really neat way, because I'm not a big descriptive person, and yet there's a lot of information that she packs into her books about these places. One of the things that Dorothy Gilman said in that interview I listened to was that she never wrote about a place she hadn't been to. So like Ubangiba was a combination of African countries that she went to. And if I recall, don't quote me on this, but if I recall correctly, the reason she made that up was because she was creating this, really big political turmoil, and she didn't want to put it into a country. She wanted to, not put that negative light on a country that it may not belong to. And so she made it up, if I recall correctly. But I do know she made it up, and I do know she said she went to all the countries. This one she just kind of combined. So there's that. It's in this one, Mrs. Pollifax gets hurt again. I'm just saying, just putting that out there. Next up is Mrs. Pollifax, Innocent Tourist. And in this one, Farrell has something completely on his own, has nothing to do with the U.S. and the State Department or anything like that. He needs Mrs. Pollifax's help. And so he wants her to come to Jordan and help him, retrieve a manuscript. That's his job. But he asks Carstairs because technically, she's belongs to the CIA. So, he does show that courtesy. And I don't recall, I just listened to this and I can't remember. Did they want something from them because of it? I don't even think so. I don't think so until they start hearing things that are going on. So they get there, so they go to Jordan, and they're supposed to go to this castle, and they're supposed to meet this guy and get this manuscript from someone who's dead. And so they meet some really interesting people. They meet some, there's this really fun girl, Hanan. I think her name is Hanan. She's a hoot. She's like, I don't know, 10, 12. And she might be 12. She loves Nancy Drew and has red cowboy boots. she's got herself a white camel, and she's as sassy as can be in her hijab. She's a traditional Islamic girl in an Islamic country, but not at the same time. Her whole family is Bedouin, and she is much more comfortable in that life. Meanwhile, her parents and everyone else are more professionals, and it's just not her. So she wants to go live with grandpa out in the desert, and it's really fun. I love that character. She's one of my favorite characters. She's just such a hoot. And so in this one, they've got to try to get this manuscript and get it back, and then everything goes wrong. And this is the one where that thing that happened way, way back in, I think it's book 2. Yeah, way back in book 2, that thing that she did that was a little out of it, but not quite. She didn't do it well, at least, and all that. Yeah, it comes back in this one, and she does something in a different way. And it was really fun to when you see this thing, you're like, oh, are they going to do it? And then they did it. It's like, yes. So, it was, it's again, it's not my favorite book. But Farrell's back, and I really, even despite his mouth, I really do love Farrell. And in this one, actually, multiple times when she gets loose with her lips and the words she allows across them, if it happens too much, he will call her on it. He's like, no, no, no. He calls her Duchess, and he's like, no, Duchess, come on. And she'd be like, okay, you're right. You know, so it's kind of funny that he can respect that this may not be a good thing for him either, you know. So that's kind of cool. So in Innocent Tourist, that's they're just supposed to be tourists, and he's supposed to get this manuscript, and they're supposed to go home. But of course, none of that happens, and then there's like this whole international intrigue, and Carstairs needed them there and didn't know it. So you know, just shows that Carstairs doesn't know it all. And finally, Mrs. Pollifax Unveiled is number 14. To that general area. They're going to Damascus, and it's really fun. You know, in is it Acts? I think it's in Acts when Paul, or is it in Acts where someone, you know, goes to Damascus into the road called Straight, and yeah. Yeah, it's in the book. It's like it's just like, look at the map. It's straight, you know, and it's just so cool. And I was like, oh, I love this. But in this one, there was a hijacking of this plane, and they're threatening these people, and this woman just gets up and walks forward and says, you know, just give me the gun, you know, and she's just like, this is going to happen. And her name is Amanda Pym, and then she disappears, and nobody knows where she is, and Carstairs wants her and Farrell to go find her and get her out if they can. Find out, is she alive? And if she is, get her out. So they're in Damascus, they're in Syria, and they've got to get her out of Syria, but there's people after them. They've been followed since the moment they arrived. People don't want this Amanda found, and they're going to have to find her, get her out of the country, and they're probably going to end up going through Jordan to do it. But the fun thing on this one is that listen to me. The fun thing on this one is that Farrell's the one that gets tortured. No, really, Shatona? But in this one, Farrell is the one who gets, you know, Emily gets injured again, but Farrell's the one who really gets it. In other books, she has been beaten, she has been hurt, but in this one, it's Farrell. I missed telling you about a couple of them. One of them was Whirling Dervish, I think. Pretty sure it was that one. Or was it? No. Whirling Dervish is no. It's the second one. It's the second book. She's hurt in that one. He hurts her. I forgot about that. Ooh. Anyway, so but basically, you know, they've got to, and again, you know, Mrs. Pollifax collects these people who will help them and who know what they need. That is her skill. She is a people person, and she can read people pretty well. Occasionally she gets it wrong though, and that is also one of the fun things about this series, you know, is that sometimes she gets it wrong, but as a general rule, it's a thing. So I'm going to go back now, and I'm going to try to rank these books. And I'm going to rank them based on which one I would want to listen to again if it's the only one I could listen to next. My favorites in order are number 1, which is book 3, The Elusive Mrs. Pollifax. And then number 2, which is book 1, The Unexpected Mrs. Pollifax. Number 10, Mrs. Pollifax and the Second Thief. I just really love that one in Italy. There's so much fun in there. Number 5, Mrs. Pollifax on Safari. Number 6, and I don't know what order I'm in anymore. I've kind of lost that. Sorry. Mrs. Pollifax on the China Station. And then number 2, The Amazing Mrs. Pollifax. And then number 7, Mrs. Pollifax and the Hong Kong Buddha. Number 4, A Poem for Mrs. Pollifax. Number 9, Mrs. Pollifax and the Whirling Dervish. And then from there on, it's just in order. Number 11, Mrs Pollifax Pursued. Number 12, Mrs Pollifax and the Lion Killer. Number 13, Mrs Pollifax Innocent Tourist. And number 14, Mrs Pollifax Unveiled. And I forgot one. So I got to think about where I'm going to put Golden Triangle. Because book 8 is a Golden Triangle. Let's figure out where this goes in there. Okay, so Whirling Dervish, and then Mrs Pollifax Pursued and Mrs Pollifax and the Lion Killer, followed by Mrs Pollifax and the Golden Triangle, and then back down to Mrs Pollifax Innocent Tourist and Mrs Pollifax Unveiled. So that is the rundown on the Mrs Pollifax books. I really wanted to get really spoilery and talk about them, but A, it would make this video crazy long, and B, you really don't want it spoiled. But they're so much fun. And again, I hope I kind of gave an idea of what you can expect violence-wise, content-wise, and language-wise. There is no smut. That's what you're going to find in the series. You're going to find, Emily Pollifax, she's a fun, quirky character. I love is it China Station? It's either China Station or Hong Kong Buddha, where her house is being renovated and she wants a bay window put slightly off center, and her decorator doesn't want to do it. He wants it symmetrical, and she's like, no. And so she's like adamant that this will not happen. I totally get her. I mean, I just so get her. I want to be Mrs. Pollifax when I grow up. I would love to just walk into the CIA and say, here, put me to work. That would be so much fun. So this is the Pollifax books. This is why I love them. They're so much fun. Seriously, listen to the samples on Audible or someplace where you can hear the audio with Barbara Rosenblatt, because they're so much fun. So there they are. I hope you like this type of book, and if you know more that are kind of like it, I would love to know it. To me, it feels like a more modern version of the Tommy and Tuppence, but with just one gal, and obviously they're not solving mysteries as much as, doing spy work, supposedly. But still, it's got that same kind of, quirky feel. And I would love to find more like it. So if you know it, please share. And yeah, I'll be back with that video with Lorna if I can ever get her in here. Okay, time to get back to work. Actually, I'm going to read because I finished The Curate's Awakening last night. I ended up tabbing a lot. And I want to keep reading it. I forgot how good that book is. Oh my gravy. It is just so good. So what you've been reading, I hope you'll share. And yeah, that was my take on Pollifax.